What if I told you that the American dream, once a global benchmark of prosperity, is now under siege? The very foundation of the United States' dominance, its economy, is showing cracks. The signs are everywhere: the dollar's decline, growing international alliances bypassing the US, and internal struggles threatening to dismantle decades of progress. This isn't just about numbers or politics. This is about the survival of a way of life. Stay with us as we uncover the realities reshaping America's future, and why this moment may determine the nation's fate. The American economy has long been a symbol of stability and global power, but history shows that no empire is immune to decline. Patrick Bet-David often emphasizes that the United States, like other great powers before it, is at a crossroads. Take, for example, the Roman Empire, which fell not because of one catastrophic event, but due to a series of internal weaknesses and external pressures. The signs we're witnessing today, a declining dollar, rising debt, and shifting global alliances, mirror the patterns of history. Are we on the brink of repeating those mistakes? The dollar, once seen as a symbol of strength and reliability, is now facing challenges it hasn't encountered in decades. Back in 2000, the dollar accounted for over 70% of global reserves. Today, that figure has dropped to about 59%, and the trend is accelerating. This is not just a statistical decline, it's a shift in trust. Nations like China and Russia are actively working to de-dollarize their economies, using local currencies and digital alternatives for trade. Even allies such as Saudi Arabia, historically aligned with the United States, are exploring partnerships that bypass the dollar entirely. This shift isn't purely economic, it's a geopolitical rebalancing. The BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, now represent a collective GDP that surpasses the G7. This coalition isn't just challenging the US economically, it's rewriting the rules of global trade. In 2023 alone, the BRICS countries announced plans to expand their bloc, inviting nations like Saudi Arabia, Iran, and Turkey to join their ranks. This growing alliance aims to create a multipolar world, reducing reliance on Western-led systems and, by extension, undermining America's dominance. Domestically, the challenges are just as daunting. The US government's fiscal policies have led to a national debt exceeding $33 trillion. Imagine this: if every American household were responsible for an equal share, each family would owe over $250,000. Meanwhile, the federal deficit continues to grow, fueled by spending that far outpaces revenue. While politicians debate solutions, the burden of these economic missteps falls squarely on the shoulders of ordinary citizens. Rising costs of living, stagnant wages, and the growing wealth gap have left many questioning whether the American dream is still achievable. But here's the critical question: is America prepared to adapt to these seismic shifts? Patrick Bet-David suggests that acknowledging these challenges is only the first step. Without a clear strategy to rebuild trust in the dollar, address domestic inequalities, and redefine its role in a changing global landscape, the United States risks losing its position as the world's leading power. The time for action is now, but the clock is ticking. But the question remains: how did we get here? To understand America's precarious position, we need to look beyond the present and analyze the systems that brought us to this point. Patrick Bet-David frequently highlights that the erosion of American dominance didn't happen overnight. It's the result of decades of compounding issues. One of the most significant factors is the shift in global economic power. In the aftermath of World War II, the US dollar became the world's reserve currency, backed by the Bretton Woods Agreement. For decades, the dollar was as good as gold, enabling the United States to wield enormous influence in global markets. Countries like Saudi Arabia agreed to trade oil exclusively in dollars, creating the petrodollar system that cemented America's economic dominance. However, as Patrick Bet-David explains, this system is no longer unshakable. The rise of alternative financial mechanisms, such as digital currencies and bilateral trade agreements, has created cracks in the dollar's armor. Consider China's Belt and Road Initiative (BRI), a multi-trillion-dollar infrastructure project connecting over 140 countries. By offering loans and investments in local currencies, China is actively reducing the dollar's relevance in global trade. Similarly, Russia and India have begun trading in their native currencies for key commodities like oil and natural gas. These shifts, while incremental, are significant. They signal a world that's increasingly moving away from dollar dependency. And this isn't just theoretical. The BRICS nations, representing over 40% of the global population, are actively discussing a unified digital currency that could completely bypass the dollar in international transactions. Domestically, another force undermining America's strength is its approach to wealth distribution and economic equality. Patrick Bet-David draws attention to a startling reality. While the U.S. GDP has grown consistently, wages for the average worker have stagnated for decades. Between 1979 and 2019, the productivity of American workers grew by 72%, but wages only increased by 17%. Where did the difference go? To the top 1%. This isn't just an economic imbalance, it's a societal one, as millions of Americans struggle to make ends meet despite living in one of the richest nations on Earth. Meanwhile, the federal government's spending continues unchecked. For every dollar the government spends, 20 cents are borrowed, adding to the $33 trillion national debt. This unsustainable cycle isn't just a financial issue, it's a ticking time bomb that could trigger a global crisis if left unaddressed. Patrick Bet-David likens this to a household living on credit cards. It might work for a while, but eventually, the bills come due. What's more concerning is how these domestic and global shifts are intertwined. As the dollar weakens internationally, the U.S. could lose its ability to fund deficits through cheap borrowing. Countries like China, which hold significant amounts of U.S. debt, have already begun reducing their exposure. If global trust in the dollar erodes further, the consequences for American households could be catastrophic, with rising inflation, higher interest rates, and a decline in purchasing power. What makes this situation even more precarious is the growing polarization within the United States. The two-party system has become increasingly adversarial, with bipartisan cooperation now a rarity. From debates over healthcare to disagreements on foreign policy, this gridlock prevents meaningful action on the very issues that threaten America's future. If the country can't unite to address its internal challenges, how can it hope to maintain its standing on the world stage? Adding to these challenges is the geopolitical tension between the U.S. and its rivals. While America continues to maintain over 700 military bases across the globe, countries like China and Russia are leveraging economic diplomacy to expand their influence. Patrick Bet-David underscores the importance of understanding this shift. While military strength remains a pillar of power, economic strength is increasingly becoming the deciding factor in global leadership. Then there's the issue of technological advancement. While the U.S. has historically led in innovation, the gap is closing as countries like China pour resources into artificial intelligence, quantum computing, and green energy. For Patrick Bet-David, this represents a critical battleground. If America doesn't prioritize investment in these areas, it risks being left behind in the industries of the future, further eroding its competitive edge. This brings us to a pivotal moment. Can America reclaim its position of strength, or is this the beginning of an irreversible decline? The answer lies not just in policy changes, but in a collective willingness to face these challenges head-on. Patrick Bet-David suggests that it's time for a national reckoning, where the U.S. acknowledges its vulnerabilities and works toward solutions that benefit the broader population, not just the elite. The narrative of American decline isn't just an abstract discussion for policymakers or intellectuals, it's a lived reality for millions of citizens. Patrick Bet-David frequently highlights the growing disparity between the American dream ideal and the day-to-day struggles of the average person. Home ownership, once considered a cornerstone of middle-class stability, is slipping out of reach for many, with housing prices skyrocketing and wages failing to keep pace. Student debt has ballooned to over $1.7 trillion, shackling younger generations and hindering their ability to build wealth. These aren't isolated problems. They are symptoms of systemic imbalances that weaken the fabric of society. Equally concerning is the erosion of trust in American institutions. Whether it's skepticism toward the media, declining faith in the electoral process, or mistrust of corporate leaders, this disillusionment creates fertile ground for division. Patrick Bet-David warns that when people lose faith in their leaders and institutions, the nation risks slipping into deeper polarization and conflict. This discontent isn't just theoretical, it's playing out in real time, with protests, rising crime rates, and a growing sense of despair in communities across the country. Internationally, America's struggles are magnified by its inability to adapt to a multipolar world. For decades, the United States acted as the de facto leader of the global order, shaping policies and agreements to its advantage. But as countries like China and Russia assert themselves, the U.S. finds itself grappling with a new reality. Patrick Bet-David argues that clinging to outdated strategies, such as economic sanctions that often harm allies more than adversaries, is a losing game. Instead, The US must pivot toward collaboration and innovation to remain relevant in this rapidly evolving landscape. Take, for example, the shift in trade dynamics. The US once dominated global trade through its technological superiority and extensive alliances. However, recent trade wars and protectionist policies have strained relationships with key partners, opening the door for competitors to fill the void. Patrick Bet-David highlights how countries like Germany, India, and even smaller nations are strengthening their ties with China, drawn by its Belt and Road Initiative and growing economic clout. This isn't just a loss of trade, it's a loss of influence. What's striking is how these external shifts mirror internal struggles. Just as the US is losing ground on the global stage, it's also facing a cultural reckoning at home. Issues like immigration, healthcare, and racial inequality dominate public discourse, but instead of fostering solutions, they often fuel division. Patrick Bet-David sees this as a critical inflection point. The US can either rise to the challenge by embracing reform and unity or continue down a path of fragmentation and decline. Even in the face of these challenges, Patrick Bet-David doesn't advocate for resignation. Instead, he emphasizes the need for actionable solutions. This includes addressing the national debt with fiscal responsibility, investing in education and infrastructure to rebuild the middle class, and fostering innovation in critical sectors like green energy and artificial intelligence. These aren't just policy recommendations. They are imperatives if America is to retain its leadership in the 21st century. Another key element Patrick Bet-David often underscores is leadership. He argues that America needs visionary leaders who can inspire and unite the nation, cutting through the noise of partisan politics to focus on solutions. Whether it's rethinking trade agreements, reforming tax policies, or rebuilding alliances, leadership will be the deciding factor in determining whether the United States can navigate this era of transformation. As the global balance of power continues to shift, the US must confront its own vulnerabilities with clarity and resolve. The challenges are immense, but so are the opportunities. Patrick Bet-David reminds us that history is filled with examples of nations that have rebounded from periods of decline, often emerging stronger for having faced their struggles head-on. The question is, will America learn from history, or will it repeat the mistakes of empires past? The central theme of Patrick Bet-David's analysis is that the American decline is not an irreversible fate, but a challenge that requires decisive action. This is where the narrative becomes both urgent and hopeful. As much as the United States faces significant obstacles, it also holds unparalleled potential. The question is whether its leaders and citizens can channel that potential into meaningful progress. One of the most pressing areas of focus is the economy. Patrick Bet-David highlights that the United States must address its over-reliance on debt, both public and private. The national debt, which now exceeds $33 trillion, is not just a fiscal problem, it's a political and social one. Left unchecked, it threatens the country's ability to fund critical programs, maintain infrastructure, and compete on the global stage. Solving this issue requires a blend of bold policy reforms and public willingness to accept short-term sacrifices for long-term stability. Equally critical is innovation. Patrick Bet-David often points to technology as a double-edged sword. While it offers immense opportunities for growth and problem-solving, it also disrupts industries and exacerbates inequality. The United States must double down on investments in areas like renewable energy, artificial intelligence, and biotechnology. Not only are these sectors essential for global leadership, but they also offer a path to creating well-paying jobs and revitalizing struggling communities. However, innovation alone isn't enough. Patrick Bet-David emphasizes that education is the foundation for a thriving economy. Without a workforce equipped with the skills needed for the jobs of tomorrow, America risks falling behind. This means rethinking the education system from the ground up, investing in STEM fields, making college more affordable, and prioritizing lifelong learning opportunities for adults whose industries are being disrupted. The political landscape presents another challenge. Patrick Bet-David underscores that bipartisan gridlock is one of the biggest obstacles to progress. The inability of lawmakers to find common ground on even the most basic issues has eroded public trust and paralyzed the government. For America to move forward, leaders must rise above party lines, focus on practical solutions, and work together for the greater good. This isn't just about policy, it's about restoring faith in the democratic process itself. On the international front, Patrick Bet-David warns that America's outdated approach to foreign relations is costing it influence. The rise of multipolar power structures like BRICS demonstrates that the world is moving away from a US-centric order. To remain relevant, America must rethink its alliances, rebuild strained relationships, and adopt a more collaborative approach to global challenges. This includes climate change, cybersecurity, and trade, all areas where international cooperation is crucial. Finally, Patrick Bet-David highlights the importance of cultural unity. America's diversity is one of its greatest strengths, but it can also be a source of division. The country must find ways to celebrate its differences while building a shared sense of purpose. This means addressing systemic inequalities, fostering open dialogue, and promoting a culture of mutual respect and understanding. As the video draws to a close, it's clear that the stakes couldn't be higher. Patrick Bet-David leaves us with a powerful call to action. The time for complacency is over. America has faced existential challenges before and emerged stronger for it. But to do so again, it must confront its flaws, embrace its strengths, and chart a new course for the future. The world is watching, and the choices America makes today will shape the global landscape for decades to come. If you found this discussion valuable, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Join the conversation in the comments and share your thoughts, because understanding these dynamics isn't just enlightening, it's empowering. Together, we can unpack the challenges, explore the solutions, and envision a brighter future for all.